Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Well-Appointed Mystic. Today I wanted to talk about why we have more than one copy of the same tarot deck. I'm going to use tarot in this example because I don't think I actually have multiples of any of my oracle decks, but tarot decks I do seem to accumulate multiple copies of the same deck. And I think I have about about 5 reasons I think people end up with more than one copy of a deck. So clearly you can see here I have 2 almost identical sets of the Intuitive Night Goddess, and I thought that this would be a good place to start. And my example here, and you'll see very quickly what the difference is that one of my decks is trimmed to remove the borders and the other one is not. And the decision to trim this deck came specifically because the first copy that I received from the publisher, the deck was damaged and the edges were really dinged up and had some kind of weird issues. And so they were going to be sending me a new copy of the deck. So I wasn't quite sure what to do with the extra copy. I didn't want to throw it away and I didn't want to give it to anyone with it damaged. So I was trying to figure out a solution. So I thought this would be a good case to trim and just see, because the borders on this deck are very large black borders, what would happen if they got trimmed off. And what ended up happening is, in order to corner round, some of the words were a little bit long, so they feel a little tight down here, which is a little bothersome. But overall, I kind of like the trimmed copy. It very much creates a smaller deck that makes it easier to handle. And for me anyway, because I have tiny little hands. But also, I really focus more on the artwork instead of the borders. What has ended up happening over the past couple years that I've had both of these is that I do tend to end up using both of them. I have not yet edged the full-size deck. I did edge the smaller deck in black. So to this point, I feel like this is a case where if you were ever curious what the Intuitive Night Goddess would look like with the borders trimmed, there you go. This is what it looks like trimmed versus untrimmed. And I can't say necessarily that I prefer one over the other now that I've trimmed it and have played with both of them. I much prefer the size of the smaller one, but in some cases you see a little bit of that white edge, which is a little bothersome to me. So they didn't all trim perfectly. It means that the artwork wasn't completely centered or whatever on the cards. So that's a little bothersome, where with the border, it's a little less noticeable if they are off by 1 millimeter or so. So that is that. At this point, I don't have any intention of getting rid of either one of these because I still haven't decided which one I prefer. But I would say that the first reason that you might have more than one copy is if you trimmed the border and either liked it or didn't like it, and then got an additional copy, one that's trimmed and one that was not. And so otherwise these decks are identical, and that is why I have 2 copies of that one. So my next example is going to be that this might hurt. And this example of why you might have more than one copy is having the original indie version of a deck and then purchasing the mass market. And in this case, with the mass market, I bought the special edition from Liminal 11 that came with the cloth, a little journal, an extra oracle deck, and then the actual deck, which I think in the case of this version, and I admit that I bought it and then really have never used it. I just knew that I had the indie version and I didn't want to, I haven't even taken the cardboard out of here. But this version does have the silver edges like My indie version has black edges, I think, or black holographic. So yeah, this one has the like oil slick iridescent foil on the edge. So in this case, I knew that I had purchased the indie deck and really enjoyed it. So when the mass market came out, I also knew that these special editions that Liminal 11 does can often be kind of collectible and interesting. The little pocket journal that was included in this, if you haven't seen it, is just like a little spread book. So you can draw out your query, your spread, and then your interpretation. And then the oracle that was included, if you have not seen this one, are characters that sort of appear in the actual deck. And it is black with turquoise foil. But like there are different elements from the various like details from various cards. So, you know, the Hermit's Lantern, you know, those little details. So it's really pretty. I had missed some of Liminal 11's previous special editions and kind of kicked myself. So when these decks came out, I really made a point of purchasing them. Wow, this magnet is really tight. I can't get these back in the box. I am still a little peeved. Like this deck, there's like a piece of board in here to get it to fit. Like it didn't need to be this big. And it also has that piece of cardboard. So the box doesn't really fit the deck like I was hoping it would. You know, the guidebook is not quite the same size. It's just packaging wise, I would have preferred that they had just put it in a slip case. I think that would have been fine. But this is an example of why you might have two copies of a deck. You have the original indie version and then a mass market edition. And part of this comes from, like, I have scratched this. I'm just horrified that I scratched the box. And it's all dusty because my life is dusty. But yeah, so this is why I have two copies of the This Might Hurt. And amazingly enough, I have never even taken the mass market out of the box. I definitely got it for its collectability, which is maybe not the smartest thing I've ever done. I think I have even actually considered just getting a copy of the mass market This Might Hurt deck so that I don't damage or disturb this beautiful box set, which is a silly reason to do anything. Either use it or don't, and, you know, give it to someone who will use it, is my opinion. I think keeping something, you know, mint in box is makes me a little crazy. But you do whatever you want to do. My feeling at this point is that I probably will sell the box set at some point because I really don't use it. I still just continue to use my original indie deck. So, okay. Another reason you might buy multiple copies of a deck is that the creator or the publisher has decided to make a pocket edition of the deck that you like, you know, or you bought the mini version. And in the case of the Everyday Witch deck, the mini deck does not come with any sort of guidebook, but the full-size deck does. I think, if I remember correctly, I purchased the Everyday Witch full-sized first, and for some reason, of all of Llewellyn's decks, this one is one of the slipperiest that I have. So I found it a little bit hard to hold on to. I did paint the edges, but I did have trouble holding on to it. So I went ahead and bought the mini edition, which you can see compared with this US Games mini is very, very tiny. However, it is more matte finish than the original. So you can see, like, the original is catching so much light where the mini edition does not. So I ended up much preferring this mini edition. Even though the artwork is very tiny and so some of the more intricate details do get lost, I use the mini edition, but I do occasionally pull out Deborah Blake's amazing, wonderful Everyday Witch Guidebook. So I keep the large size deck to use at home, and the little pocket edition goes in my travel tin, which I believe I talked about in the loot drop post. So if you want to hear more about my travel tin, I will include a link in the cards so you guys can see that. But yeah, so this is my little tiny, it fits in this little tin and goes in my bag pretty much all the time. So, and then this stays at home. So that's one of the reasons. And again, the example of the Zodiac Tarot is sort of the same thing. This is just a US Games version of the full-size deck versus the pocket-size deck. And this is another one where, for whatever reason, they decided that the best thing to do with this deck was to make it just shiny as all get out. This is the slickest. This one I did paint the edges on the full-size deck, which came out first, and then this mini deck came out earlier this year. I really like this for doing social readings with friends because while the imagery is very traditionally RWS, the artwork is a little more contemporary feeling, and so I think it makes people who are not as familiar with tarot a bit more comfortable. I've done readings with friends, you know, at dinner parties or out to eat or whatever, and they have really liked this deck, and it worked really well. Actually, the same thing with the This Might Hurt. I would love a mini version of that. That would be great. But it's the same thing. It's a deck that, because it has much more modern imagery, but is still very based in RWS, is very comfortable for using readings. Here's a good example. You can see them side by side. But yeah, because this artwork is very graphic and simple, it reduced down very nicely. And because the deck is smaller, it's easier for me to shuffle than this larger, supery, slick, shiny cardstock. But yeah, so that is the, I'm going to say my third reason for buying multiple copies of a deck. Is having a full-sized edition and a mini, and I feel like that happens a lot. If it's a deck that you really like, it's always nice to have a travel version that you can take with you, or one that you feel comfortable using with other people. I'm really attached to this Zodiac Tarot. So the full-sized edition is really my deck, and this one is my sort of my public deck. And, you know, whether you believe that decks can be, you know, they have a certain purpose and they feel more comfortable in that way or another. Anyway, I'm babbling. So my fourth reason for having multiple copies of a deck is that there is a new edition published. So I am using one of my most coveted and beloved decks. This is the Vertigo Tarot from DC Comics / Vertigo. This is the original edition. I probably have the box somewhere, but I've had it for so long. This dates back to the late probably early 2000s. That the very first edition came out. The book was hardcover with, like, you can see how abused mine is. There's gunk and everything. It was one of my very first tarot decks, and so I did use it a lot. I worked my way through college in a comic book store, so all of the content of the Vertigo Tarot is very familiar to me. Later, I discovered, of course, that this book was actually written by Rachel Pollack, and so it is a very well-written guidebook. My only complaint is that they went a little Ray Gun magazine graphic on the text, so it can often be a little challenging to read. my dream is that they republish this again and just typeset it like normal people. I know that it's fun to do this and make it look funky and everything, but the type is, for the size of this book, the type is really tiny. The pictures are in black and white, which is fine. That's not a big deal. But there's just a lot of real estate that could have been used for the text to make it easier to read. And I know that they wanted it to feel fun in 90s and Reagan and what have you. But I would absolutely love it if they republished this deck and used much better cardstock, but we'll get into that in a minute, and also made the text easier to read, especially considering that the book was written by Rachel Pollack, who is a comic book fan, sci-fi fantasy, as well as a fantastic tarot reader. So there is that. So this was the second edition. This is why I have two copies, because as you can tell, just looking at mine, the edges are dinged. I have never painted them. The cards are bowing a little bit. I really wanted to have a backup copy because this deck meant so much to me. I'm a huge fan of the artist who created it, Dave McKean. I actually got to talk to him on the phone once, but that's a whole different story. He doesn't know, but I totally fangirled that day. I worked at a type foundry, and he called to order typefaces back when you couldn't just download them off the internet. You had to actually order them and have them sent to you like on a floppy disk. It was a long time ago. But anyway, so Dave McKean did all the covers for this Sandman comic book and a lot of the other series that were available, like Black Orchid and things like that, through the Vertigo line of DC Comics. But so this is the second edition. And if you ever were curious what the difference was between the original Vertigo and the second edition, the cards are thinner and smaller. They are shiny where these were matte. And I realized I've never taken the plastic off of this deck. It has always been held in reserve, but there's some trimming issues. The colors are much darker because it is the glossy stock versus the matte finish. But also I noticed these cards are in no particular order. I did not shuffle these. They came like this. And I pulled the plastic off just to see if it was just this one card that had been slipped, but they are entirely out of order. I don't know what they were thinking or why they're so mismatched. And honestly, I don't know. I've had this deck for so long, whether it came, I suspect it came in order. It seems like it did. So it's very surprising that this is just in like crazy pants order. But, and honestly, I don't think I even really opened the guidebook. I love that it has this beautiful color image on the cover, but, and it's a paperback instead of a hardcover like the original. But you will notice that the book is smaller and the type is even smaller. So they did not retypeset any of this. It is the same sort of crazy shaped lettering. So, and the spine is really, really stiff. I can barely open it without like it's, do you hear the crunchy noises? Like that glue is really crunchy. So this has always just been held in reserve, on the offhand chance that anything untoward happened to my original. The funny thing was it was in the box, in the bag with the receipt from when I purchased it. So I bought this second copy in 2005 to the tune of $125, just so you know. And I believe the original deck I bought in a comic book store for about somewhere between $75 and $90. But yeah, so this whole thing was still in the plastic bag. I am basically just covering my bases in terms of, yeah, because it says on the box that it was originally retailed for, pardon me, $29.95 US, $49 Canada, and I paid $127. So when people ask what's the most you've ever spent for a tarot deck, I now know because I saved the receipt like a crazy person. So my reason number 4 for why you might have more than one deck is different editions and or concerned that your favorite deck will not be available anymore. And that kind of is actually 2 reasons, but for me, it's sort of one and the same. I bought an extra copy because one, it was different and I wanted to see what the difference was, but also I wanted to have a backup copy. So my last reason number 5, and I know that this is an incredibly touchy subject, so please let me get my whole discussion out of the way before you leave me horrible comments. When I got back into tarot in, I think, 2022, I did not know that there was such a thing as knockoff tarot decks. I didn't know people were doing that. It would be like assuming that someone was making fake copies of paperback books or something. I just didn't know. And so I saw the Antique Anonymous and I knew that it was a very popular deck. And I found a copy on Poshmark and I thought someone was selling theirs secondhand. I did not realize that it was a counterfeit deck, nor did I realize that that was never designed to be a mini deck. So I was absolutely horrified when I got it and I was watching videos on YouTube about it, and someone, I think, mentioned that it hadn't, like it only ever came in this large box with a big guidebook. And I was like, well, the one I got didn't have a guidebook. I'm very confused. I was mortified, absolutely mortified when I figured out what had happened. Like, if it has a barcode like this, it is definitely counterfeit. It had this weird URL at the bottom. Like, everything about this deck was totally counterfeit. And so I immediately went on Amazon and I purchased the actual deck because I wanted the creator to get the credit and the money. I wanted to have the real deck with the real cards and the, all of the pieces. And I did not want to be one of those people who only had this horrible counterfeit deck. It makes me feel horrible that I ever bought it, but this goes back to, like, I didn't want to pass this on to someone else and exacerbate the problem of people purchasing and collecting and counterfeit decks. So I have held on to it. I will go into a little bit more detail about what I did with it in a second. But this is the beautiful, I've never painted the edges, but I do plan to. The beautiful Antique Anatomy. The guidebook is fantastic. There's so much information in here. She includes color correspondences, spreads, there's astrological associations, element, companion, like there's so much in here. And I realize these listings are very short, but it is a pip style deck. So really just giving you those like keywords and details is really a great place to start. The cards are uncoded. The book has plain paper pages, so it just feels like a really nice book. So I was very pleased to be able to sort of correct a little bit my error. That being said, I was trying to figure out what can I do with this garbage deck that I bought. And I mean, you can tell looking at the back of them, this is definitely a different color. Like everything about it, I just didn't know at the time that I bought it. And I have never bought a counterfeit deck again. This was just one of those situations where, sometimes you have to learn the hard way and kind of live with yourself that you made a mistake. And I just didn't know, like, coming into this, how would you know that such a thing even existed? So all of this is to say that I decided to make something with these counterfeit cards. And I used Lisa Pepez's Tarot with Training Wheels class to write on each card my keywords and use this as a learning deck. This way I didn't feel bad that I drew on it. If the paint pens that I use scratch off, no harm, no foul. But I ended up really enjoying the experience of just manipulating these cards and making them my own, and just playing with adding my keywords and little details and just little drawings. So I added the white paint pen and black Sharpie lettering on each of them, and a chosen keyword. And yes, the color on these is barfy compared with this, which has a beautiful soft, like antiqued color finish, where this is kind of a poopy brown. But I feel like I was able to save it a little bit and make it worthwhile. Again, I will never sell these or give these away. If they eventually become too worn, I will dispose of them in some meaningful way, but I don't want to continue the trend of people purchasing counterfeit decks. It's not good for our industry. It's not good for creatives. We have enough things to fight against. But I feel like if this is something that happened to you, if you accidentally got a hold of a counterfeit deck because you didn't know it was counterfeit or someone gave it to you, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into any kind of new age shop, crystal shop or whatever, and they have counterfeit decks on their shelf. And I get so upset. Someone somewhere told them, to buy decks on, Temu or Alibaba or whatever, and without knowing that what they were getting was counterfeit. I end up just not shopping in those stores anymore. I'm like, if you can't figure out that you bought the wrong decks, and I know I should talk to the owners and explain to them that you're not buying them from from the manufacturer or from the publisher of these decks, and therefore the creators are not getting any credit. They're not getting their, financial, I don't even know what the word is I'm looking for, like whatever stipend, or, the publisher isn't saying, people love this deck and they're selling more and more, so we should hire this creator to make more decks, and that kind of thing. So, yeah. So anyway, I hope that this kind of gives a little feedback. What I wanted to say was, if you found yourself purchasing a counterfeit deck by accident, turning it into a learning deck is a great solution to solving it. I mean, I've had several people say, oh, we'll just, put it in one of those, little, what are those little library boxes or something. And I'm like, I don't want to continue this trend of these knockoff decks. The deck doesn't have a book. It doesn't have a guidebook. It doesn't have any information. So it wouldn't really help anyone to get their first tarot deck. I would rather take a vintage deck that I have, a Rider-Waite-Smith or something that someone could apply with a book. And those Rider-Waite-Smith decks, because the artwork is in the public domain, you can get a very inexpensive RWS deck without stepping on someone else's intellectual property and anything. So I hope that I gave people a little bit of confidence to find a new use for a counterfeit deck. I'm still mortified that I own it and that I fell for it. But I'm sure that's how people feel when they fall for scams, people calling on the phone and asking for donations and, that kind of thing. So if it happened to you, don't feel bad. Just, like me, try to be a better consumer in the future. If you're unsure if a deck is counterfeit, go to the publisher or go straight to the creator's website or Instagram and ask where you can purchase it legitimately. So all of that, reasons you may have more than one deck. Just a recap. You trimmed it. Reason number 1, you trimmed it. Reason number 2, the deck was available, and I'm not doing these in order, I apologize. The deck is available in full size and tin or pocket edition, is another reason. You bought a counterfeit and you want to make it right. You bought the indie edition and now you want the mass market edition. And finally, it's your favorite deck, and you want to make sure that it lasts your lifetime. So those are all the reasons that I have for having multiple copies of the same decks. What reasons do you have? Should this be a tag, a tarot tag, and have other people submit their ideas and why they might have more than one copy of the same deck? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you again soon.